BODIE. Prologue. What? Whoa! Well, if this don't dunk my hat in the water. The tired old miner figured he'd managed to holler loud enough to scare off whatever landed on the shakedown of horse blankets he used for a bedroll. He'd been snoozing nice and easy when something jumped onto his blankets and landed near his right thigh. Until that moment, his mule's trail saddle had made for a suitable pillow. But when he was jerked out of a sound sleep, he knocked the back of his head hard on the wood post horn. He rubbed the back of his head briefly and listened to the dark. The hollow thud that surprised him awake was followed by silence, dead silence in the moonlit desert. It was an ominous sound. Lucius Ambert didn't want to admit it, but he was a tad nervous, because whatever the critter was that had just jumped atop his makeshift bedroll, it wasn't frightened off by his hollering at all. "My aching back," he grumbled. He reached out tentatively and knocked the object from the blankets. Christ, it sure did stink terrible. His hand had brushed against stringy hair and something worse, something thick and gummy. Now Lucius was known as a man who had never shied away from trouble of any sort. He'd fought Indians as a young man and had proved himself a soldier in the war and had defended his few lucky claims against every rascal jumper. But that didn't mean he was particularly anxious to investigate this disturbing matter of something strange and smelly, which had nearly jumped onto his lap and then apparently died right there. Lucius reached out slowly, and his fingers took hold of the hairy thing. He scrambled quickly from the confines of his temporary bed beneath the BODIE Creek Bridge to get a better look. Even the bright moonlight wasn't much help to Lucius's failing eyesight, so he lifted the object directly in front of his face. In 58 years of living, it was the first occasion Lucius Ambert had been known to scream. He made up for the lack by screaming again and again. But then it wasn't every day a severed head was dropped into a sleeping man's lap. Chapter 1. Gold. Yellow, glittering, precious gold. The baseness of man, and yet his antidote, his blessing and his curse, his happiness and his misery, his solace and his affliction, the forger of change and manumitter, the pastor and the prison and the releaser, the rich man's strength, the poor man's weakness. BODIE Standard, 1877. March 1st, 1879, BODIE, California. 24 bay hooves thunder-drummed against the desert floor, their sound nearly drowned out by the crescendo of heaving lungs and flaring nostrils. "Hi-ya!" the driver yelled and slapped his reins, stealing hurried glances over his shoulder at the devil on his tail. A signpost just blurred past him for Sweetwater. His horses knew this route to Carson City blindfolded. "Hi-ya! Hi-ya!" A shot rang out, and the driver felt something icy hot whiz past his right cheek. His beloved horses were bleating in desperation. The 6 glorious beasts were work horses, large and strong. They were not bred to run, and they certainly were not made for speed. Conway worried their stout hearts might soon explode in their chests, and still he had no choice but to spur them on. Running was their only hope. If they could outrun the assassin, if they could survive for about 10 more miles, they would be too close to the next town for thwack! The round hit the commercial buckboard near the driver's right foot. Conway shook the reins hard and snuck another hasty look back. He saw Touchstone's man, Parker, line up his aim at the lead horses. "Shit," was all Conway managed before the last shot rang out. Boston, the lead 19-hand quarter horse, who was Conway's best friend in the world, went down. Brimstone and Barley toppled over him, followed a fraction of a second later by the rest of the horses, the driver, and the enormous wagon rolling end over end in a spectacular splintering crash. For Conway, seconds slowed impossibly. He observed with morbid fascination and a healthy measure of disbelief a kaleidoscope of brown and black shoot past. He then smiled at a churning blue sky and clouds of cotton candy. Now his eyes widened at the tremendous sprays of bright red and stark white shards glittering in the high desert sun. My horses are coming apart, Conway realized with horror. And then he was floating and twirling with the kaleidoscope, blue, red, sprays, unforgiving desert floor. The sounds were peculiar too, a rhythmic snapping and cracking of yoke and leather strap and bone. Conway slammed into the ground with a concert of splintering bone and torn flesh, and his eyes came to rest on the lifeless eyes of Boston, his favorite horse. A sob choked on its way up Conway's throat. "Bost!" he croaked as he forced his look away, and up just in time to see his oversized buckboard flying straight at him. Parker pulled a pouch from his vest and began rolling himself a cigarette as his horse, Clementine, circled the field of carnage. He had to be certain he had completed his assignment. He saw that a few of the horses, bearing hideous injuries, were still laboring for final breaths. He sighed and pulled his revolver out, flipped open the cylinder and checked his ammunition supply. 3 rounds. He dished 2 fingers into a pile of bullets in another pocket. He probably had a dozen or more rounds on him, and the beasts were suffering horribly. But that wasn't really his problem, was it? A man can't afford to be wasting bullets in these badlands. He licked his cigarette paper, closed, lit it up, and inhaled deeply. As he exhaled, he tipped his hat at the few of the still breathing horses. "Don't worry, you'll be dead 'fore the buzzards gather to pick at you, I think." He laughed cruelly, gave the grisly scene one last survey, and turned back toward BODIE, whistling a catchy tune. It promised to be another beautiful California day.